What if I told you that human beings have the ability to read minds? Sounds pretty insane, right? But I'll prove it to you. But first, I have a little quiz for everyone, okay? So I'm going to display a series of images, and I would really appreciate if all of you could say what emotion you think these people are feeling based on the image. Okay? Everyone understood the assignment? Yes? Okay. We'll start with the first picture. Okay. The second picture. This one's a bit more difficult. And the last picture. Okay, we'll ignore that one mysterious person. But, okay, good job, everyone. That was nice cooperation. But what we can take away from that quiz is we don't know for sure what goes on in people's minds. But through reading their body language and their facial expressions, we can kind of make a guess. Think back to when you were a little kid at the cinema. As you watched your favorite characters on the big screen, didn't it feel like a gate almost opened within you, and you got to pretend to be somebody else, even if it was just for 2 hours? Well, as a little kid at the cinema and as a now 18-year-old, whenever I sit before the big screen and watch as the story unfolds, I always ponder the same question. And that question is, what would I do if I were in their shoes? This question that we often ask ourselves is the true essence of empathy. And it's a bit like what we did with the pop quiz just now. Now, of course, empathy and mind reading are not the same thing. I kind of lied to you in the beginning, but it's a lot more similar than we realize. And empathy is probably the closest we'll ever get to mind reading. So why don't we use it to our benefit? I'm hopeful that some people here today would have seen the 2019 Joker film. But to those of you who haven't, okay, prior to the release of this film, the Joker was depicted as a villain. He was seen as this evil, psychotic, criminal mastermind, basically rooting for the world's downfall. But in the 2019 Joker film, we got to see him in his raw form. We saw him as a man named Arthur Fleck. Arthur is just a regular guy like you and I, and he's trying his best to live a normal life, despite his rough upbringing and mental illness that causes him to laugh uncontrollably. And due to this mental illness, the entire city of Gotham looks down on Arthur and rejects him, which causes him to be left socially inept. Throughout the film, we watch as Arthur gets bullied and mocked, and above all, marginalized, facing numerous accounts of injustice. Time after time, Arthur reaches out for help, only to be disappointed by people who simply won't give him the time of day. This disappointment manifested into anger, which in turn led to hatred towards his community. Through all the pain and abuse, we watch as the birth of the Joker takes place. And we get to see how the oppressed can slowly turn into the oppressor if they're really pushed far enough. Now, of course, none of this is to justify his wrongdoings or his crimes, but perhaps it allows us to understand the reasonings behind them, to see the humanity behind the Joker, and to realize that he is simply a product of his environment. Growing up with a lack of love and a lack of empathy is what led him down this spiral. And I think a lot of the time we're too quick to dehumanize criminals, whilst completely ignoring anything that led up to the crime. Which is why I think it's important for all of us here today to think about our role in creating someone like the Joker. Because if at least one person had stopped and empathized with him, maybe there would be no Joker to begin with. Because really, it's these seemingly insignificant issues that quickly escalate to become a much larger problem. And so to prevent this snowball effect, we should really tackle problems of the world at its root. That root being a lack of empathy. As viewers, we're slowly able to resonate with Arthur's pain and understand that though his actions are violent, they're likely a product of his marginalization. And after having watched the film, we might have been able to empathize with Arthur, right? But let me just ask all of you in the audience, if you were to turn to your left and see Arthur sitting right next to you, would you still be able to empathize with him? If Arthur were real and alive today in 2023, would you be able to empathize with him? Just think about that for a while. But generally speaking, we find it a lot easier to empathize with fictional characters as opposed to real human beings. But why is that? I thought about it for a while, and I came to a conclusion. Whenever we're reading about fictional characters or watching them on television, we're always one step away from detachment. And what I mean by that is you can simply just close the book or switch off the TV. And if you're in a cinema, you could literally just walk out of the cinema. No one is stopping you from doing that. And at the end of the day, the power is in your hands, and it's just entertainment, nothing more. On the other hand, when such a person is in your life, you actually have to deal with their issues, and they don't just disappear whenever you like. There's quite a big difference there, and sometimes having to deal with someone else's issues on top of your own, that can be really difficult. While it's valid, we shouldn't use it as an excuse to do nothing. Sorry. This is your chance to empathize with me. Sick, by the way. There's a cold going around. Terrible. But anyways, on a small scale, think about how often you invalidate the feelings of your friends and family and people you supposedly hold close to your hearts. If you've said any of these phrases, please raise your hand. You've said, come on, don't be shy, be honest. Come on, guys. Yeah. Okay. And on a larger scale, how often have you been scrolling through social media or whatever, Facebook, Instagram, and you come across breaking news, some kind of global crisis is happening, but simply because you don't feel like dealing with it in the moment, you scroll past it? Now, I understand social media is often used as a form of escapism to sort of get away from the misery of life, which is why it makes sense for us to want to scroll past anything that could potentially be triggering. I get that, I understand. But at the same time, through just a swipe of a finger, we create a distance between ourselves and the serious happenings of society. Unconsciously, we react to such news in an insensitive manner, simply because repetition can become overwhelming. When we see things everywhere and they keep happening again and again and again, eventually we become too familiarized with these things, and so they become a lot less important in our heads. In psychology, there's something known as in vivo desensitization, and it's a type of exposure therapy developed to aid people in confronting their fears. Because when people fear something, they tend to avoid it. In the short run, this avoidance might obviously reduce feelings of stress and anxiousness, but in the long run, it can really exacerbate these issues, making daily life a struggle, which is why we have in vivo desensitization. So one scenario involves a patient that has a fear of clowns, which is also known as coulrophobia. And in this scenario, the patient might be put into situations where they will see or be in the presence of clowns. This is normally done in stages of graded exposure, starting with the least frightening element and slowly increasing the level of difficulty as the patient progresses. So the patient might start out by looking at pictures of clowns, to watching videos of clowns, until eventually they can stand in the same room as one, or potentially engage in physical contact with one. But the point is, by the end of that, the patient would have overcome their fear of clowns because they've experienced clowns in all forms, therefore becoming desensitized to them. Now, why is any of that relevant? Well, because something very similar is happening to all of us, except it's not something we should be proud of. Think of COVID-19, the Ukraine-Russia war, global warming, the hunger crisis, poverty, Hurricane Katrina, all of these global issues. I could go on listing them for days, but that wouldn't be the point. Because what we need to realize is that all of these issues have one thing in common, and it has to do with us. Everyone seems to care until they don't. A not so recent but equally as important event is the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, I want you to think back when it was first announced that George Floyd was murdered and brutally harassed by the American police. How did you feel? How shocked were you to hear about such a thing? Now think today. Are you just as shocked? When the situation first arose, there was something known as Blackout Tuesday. And I'm not sure if all of you have heard of it, but basically it was a social movement online to show support and solidarity towards the sufferings of Black people throughout history. So what people were doing is they were posting pictures of Black squares on their Instagram. Sorry. Anyways, people were posting pictures of Black squares on their Instagram, Facebook, and all sorts of social media platforms in order to show the support. That was meant to be useful, but it ended up taking a turn for the worse because a lot of people used Blackout Tuesday as a form of self-benefit, and a lot of performative activism took place on this day. What I mean is, all of these big brands and celebrities were posting Black squares just to say, "Hey guys, look at me, I'm not racist. Also, you should probably follow my Instagram while you're at it." Now, this actually did help to bring more light to the issue, but at the same time, people were just posting Black squares to seem woke. They were just following along, and it slowly became just another trend that people were soon to forget about. Daily, our minds are saturated with numbers, statistics, and estimates. And although it's important for us to be aware of current events, it's kind of pointless if we can't actually understand and empathize with the people involved. And this is the problem that our society is currently facing, because our society as a whole is becoming increasingly desensitized, unable to put situations into perspective. Honestly, there's nothing other to blame it on than human nature in the hands of technology. And where we actually see technology coming in the way of empathy is through internet algorithms. Whether you're on TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram, you, all of you, are a victim of internet algorithms, myself included. So to put this into perspective, I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, I was really obsessed with capybaras. And if you don't know, it's a type of animal. It's really cute, and I just really like them, right? But I could go on a rant about how much I like them. But because I was so obsessed with capybaras, my YouTube recommendation looked like this. And this is a real picture, by the way. I just took a screenshot. But it seems pretty convenient, right? To have all of this content lined up just for me to watch, to suit my current taste and my personal interests. I agree, it is convenient, and I'm a huge fan of internet algorithms, and I applaud whoever created it. Thank you, wherever you are. But although it's convenient, if this were to be placed into the wrong hands, it could potentially be very dangerous for our society. And you might be thinking, well, you like capybaras, YouTube is giving you capybaras. What seems to be the issue here? Well, actually, that is the problem. That's the very issue right here. We're only receiving information that we want, and not information that we need. This gives rise to confirmation bias and makes most social media platforms, if not all, breeding grounds for echo chambers. Now, what is an echo chamber, you might ask? Well, it's an environment whereby people only encounter opinions or information that reflects and reinforces their own. The reason why echo chambers might be on the rise nowadays is due to the psychological safety that it provides us. In a world full of opposing beliefs, echo chambers might serve as a safety net for fragile egos. For example, this is Bob. Bob believes that women don't deserve rights, and I'm hopeful no one in this room here agrees with that. But if you do, well, what are you doing here? But anyways, because this is Bob's belief, he might try go online and find some information that supports this belief. Shortly after, internet algorithms are going to track Bob's searches and the things that he clicks on so that similar content can be recommended. Over time, Bob will be stuck in a cycle of misinformation. And just think about it. If you're not being exposed to different perspectives and different ways of thinking, immediately your field of vision is narrowed down. Also, that over time could really lead to a perspective deficient lifestyle. And if you're not able to view things from different ways of thinking other than your own, how could you possibly ever have empathy? Now, of course, internet algorithms are not going to disappear anytime soon. So really, it's up to us to regulate the content that we consume. How you can do that is don't believe everything you see on the internet. Don't just buy into whatever Andrew on Twitter tells you. Question everything you see, including this speech. Everything I'm saying, question it. Now, in a world where there are lots of things that hinder our ability to empathize, we should really take the time to think about how we can actually cultivate empathy within ourselves. Because just like any other skill, whether that be riding a bike or swimming, empathy can be taught, learnt, and practiced. A 2014 study by the Journal of Applied Social Psychology showed that elementary school students in Italy and high school students in the UK were more empathetic towards immigrants, refugees, and the LGBTQ+ community after having read Harry Potter. And I know that's quite ironic considering the transphobic comments made by author J.K. Rowling. And I'm in no way supporting that. But for the purpose of this talk, let's separate the art from the artist. Anyways, the research showed that in the world of Harry Potter, there are strict social hierarchies, which lead to seemingly obvious parallels in prejudices in our society. So the students were able to compare the injustices within the series to injustices in the real world. And in that way, they were able to learn empathy through reading a book. Now, whether we're consuming fiction through books or movies, fiction has the ability to transport us into characters' minds, allowing us to see, feel, and think like them. Fiction has the ability to make us experience life through a different age, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, species. And in this way, fiction serves as a playground for practicing empathy. And I know, claiming that all of the world's problems are going to be fixed by fairy tales would be naive at best. But there are only so many things that money can solve. We could continue paying for war reparations, for damage caused after riots, or for tax money that goes towards prisons, and all of these things that are a result of disagreement or violence. We could continue doing that. Or we could just empathize. After all, empathy is free. I don't know if you remember, but earlier in the speech, I asked all of you if you'd be able to empathize with Arthur if he were sitting right next to you. I think in general, it's a lot easier for us to empathize with vulnerable collectives. So little kids or small kittens and puppies, or in this case, Arthur, because we know Arthur's story. We know the pain and suffering that he's been through. So in our eyes, Arthur is vulnerable. So it might be easier to empathize with him, right? But if I were to change the question and instead ask, would you be able to empathize with the Joker if he were sitting right next to you? Likely not everyone in this room would be able to say yes, simply because he is the oppressor, and we know in our minds that he is capable of causing harm to us. So why would we want to empathize with someone so terrible like him? But what we need to realize is by being unable to see the humanity behind the darkness, we then add to the darkness ourselves. By not being able to empathize with him, we're really just making everything a lot worse. And we need to realize that no matter how scary, how cruel looking, or how violent someone may seem, we should still try to listen to their story. We should still try and empathize with them, because at the end of the day, empathy should be for everyone. And selective empathy is really just apathy in disguise. Empathy is the ability to see with the eyes of another, to feel with the heart of another, and to listen with the ears of another. Empathy makes it so that a stranger is not so strange after all. And because we care, we should make an effort to rediscover empathy. Thank you.